All right. Well, hello everyone and kia ora. Welcome to the first of the ICOMOS New Zealand talk series for March 2023. In particular, a very warm welcome to our special guest, Peter Cox, as well as our audience online and those joining us in person here as well. I'm Stacey and I'm a board member of the International Council for Monuments and Sites, or ICOMOS, as many of us know, and I'll be here to really just help with moderating our session. So for those, thank you, Peter. For those who are new to ICOMOS or interested in learning more, ICOMOS is an international group or network, I should say, of people who are devoted to the safeguarding of places of cultural heritage value. It was founded in 1965 and based in Paris, France, and we currently have around 10,500 members across 107 countries. But here, ICOMOS New Zealand was incorporated in 1987. So now I am aware that many of those joining us in person and via Zoom will know Peter very well through his many years of work, both on the national and international scales. Peter is a founding member and the current managing director of CCI, or Carrick Conservation International, which was established in 1995. He is an expert in embodied and embedded carbon in existing buildings, and since 2012, he served as the president of the ICOMOS. In 2019, Peter was elected a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts for his services to these issues. And he currently works with governments, local authorities, universities to help improve legislation.
And clearances.
Oh, could everyone please mute yourselves?
Sorry, can everybody mute? Please?
For transmission.
All those who are zooming in, can you please check that your microphones are muted, please?
Thank you very much.
Well, name and shame.
Thanks, everyone. Yes, so Peter's work is, as we were saying, with local governments, universities to really help improve the guidelines on conservation in older and traditional, older building stock in general. So the program for this afternoon will start off with a short talk by Peter focused on really unpacking the relationship between cultural heritage and climate action, but also with reference to the various ICOMOS efforts that have been developed in response. Then, as we very much recognize that effective climate action requires multiple and diverse perspectives, the second half of the session will feature an expert panel of ICOMOS members joining us both in person and online, as we try to really look forward and discuss both shared challenges and also prospective solutions. So really at that, just a few last points for all. If you are on Zoom, please do ensure that your mic is muted if you're not speaking. And of course, if you do have a question for our panel and for Peter, please do feel free to post it in the chat, as we very much we welcome your questions for our panel discussion and the Q&A segment in the second half of this session. So at that, we here in person and on Zoom are really delighted to welcome Peter, and we look forward to a great conversation. So over to you, Peter.
No pressure, Stacey. A short talk. Have you ever heard an Irishman give a short talk? But I don't have a pint of Guinness in front of me, so I should. Anyway, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for hosting this. It's an honor to talk to people. We had a good chat this morning with a number of people, which was really encouraging. And so I'm going to just go through a few things. And this is kind of a dilemma, if you like, heritage and net zero, which is the kind of, or has been the buzzword in Europe, certainly for the last 10 years. Well, really since 2009, when the EU introduced the first kind of legislation, which is called the, what is it called? Energy Performance Buildings Directive. It's a bit of a mouthful. And that was introduced in 2009, and all 28 countries, as it was then in EU, they all signed up to this, and it was really driving what was called net zero. Now, we know now that this was primarily aimed at operational energy as opposed to anything else, and we think that's a problem. But is it a wicked problem? Sorry, what do I hit? Whoops, went too far. How do I go back? Okay, or is it? And this is a question that we've been looking at over the last, say, 5 to 6 years, since we realized that if we just go after operational energy, which is the energy that buildings use, it's going to compromise what we call the embodied carbon, which is the carbon that already exists in an existing building, or indeed embedded carbon, which is new carbon that's put in to rectify the energy efficiency, if you like. So our own, I'll just give a little plug, if you don't mind, very quickly, but our major activities has been really from a materials point of view. My own background is in material science, and I've set up Carrick really because I felt at the time architects didn't learn enough about materials, and therefore they went to mainly suppliers to look for information what to do. And if a supplier is supplying a particular product, of course they want you to use that product. So I felt there was a need for a kind of an independent technical advisory consultancy, and thankfully 28 years we're still here, so obviously it has worked to a degree. And then we about, well, actually, 12, oh, God, we're 23, aren't we? 13 years ago, ICOMOS Ireland hosted the ADCOM meeting in Dublin. And a lot of the concern at that meeting was about, will this drive for energy efficiency attack or damage or influence badly our heritage buildings? So I was fingered to set up a working group to look at this. And it's been a hell of a journey and a wonderful one, to be honest. And then later, when we said, yes, this is a risk, then we ICOMOS set up an international scientific committee, which is still going, thankfully. And it's now, I believe, about 60 strong international from about 30 odd different countries. But that gave me an avenue into learning about what's happening with buildings, what's happening with the sort of products that are available for energy upgrading. And also, you know, where can we get information and how can we get information? So following that, I got very involved in this sector, which I must say I'm enjoying very much. We are involved with the Fraunhofer Institute of Building Physics in Germany, and we've got a live laboratory there where we've fitted out about 12 different rooms with all different products, from heating to cooling to window upgrades to internal insulations, external insulations, roof insulations, and you name it. And the beauty of working with Fraunhofer is they have a bucket full of money and they give you loads of widgets to put in buildings to monitor. So so it really is a kind of a wonderful resource of information and hard data, which is what we're missing really. being a member of ICOMOS and being in this position, I was asked by Paris to represent ICOMOS on an EN standard, which is a European standard. And the one that we wrote in 2017 is EN 16883, which is guidelines to the energy retrofit of traditional and heritage buildings. And it's a prescriptive, it's a process rather than a prescriptive method of doing it, because I used to have a slide with a thumbprint on it and saying buildings are like fingerprints, no two are the same, no matter what. And and then obviously being invited and being in that position was interesting, to be invited to speak at the IPC conference in Canada in about 2019, just before COVID, thankfully. And then working with the Climate Change and Heritage Work Group within ICOMOS has been really fascinating. And then out of that group, and ICOMOS formed the Climate Heritage Network, which is a fantastic organization run now by Andrew Potts of US ICOMOS. I always think this is a great kind of remark. Adam Markham, who is American, the wonderful name of Union of Concerned Scientists. It's great. But no community, culture, region, or type of heritage is immune from climate risks. Climate change impacts from sea level rise to coastal flooding to drought and extreme heat will sorely test the adaptive capacity of diverse cultural systems, and that includes building cultural heritage as well. The Climate Heritage Network produced the impact of climate change on cultural heritage, and we're actually doing part 3 of that now, which is coming up more with adaptive and mitigation, adaptation and mitigation, which is really where we need to be really. You probably, most of you know, particularly from ICOMOS, the Future of Our Past, which was a collaborative group from the Climate Change Heritage and Working Group. And we produced this document. My colleague Kathy Daly was involved in the adaptation section, and I was chief or head editor, if you like, of the mitigation one. But it's a wonderful document. It's massive. But it really is very, very interesting. From an Irish point of view, I think we are slightly ahead of the curve from a government point of view. This is the Climate Change Sectoral Adaptation Plan for Built and Archaeological Heritage. We were commissioned, Carrigan was commissioned by the Department of Environment and Climate Change to produce this document as one of our major kind of formation of an overall Irish climate action plan. And it's available, and if I give either Stacey or Pamela kind of links to these documents later, then they can be passed because they are in the public domain. But what we did as the nation, we got together with the government and the private sector and came up with this national adaptation framework, so that there was a framework set down, and then 12 different departments, and obviously built heritage and archaeological heritage was one, transport was another, tourism was another, and there were 12 different departments of the Irish government asked to do individual adaptation plans, and they are all now combined into the Irish Climate Action Plan, which was actually then put into law last year, and it's actually called the Climate Change and Decarbonisation Act of 2021, and it's now law, and every local authority, for instance, within Ireland are now obliged under law to write their own climate action plan for their own kind of jurisdiction. And that's beginning to happen and beginning to come to fruition. But what it is doing is it's getting word out there, because all the local authorities are involving communities and community groups. And so it really is getting some kind of motion going. We've just finished this document, which is a new energy efficiency in traditional buildings guideline for the Irish government. And this is a copy of the front of the draft, because we had to send it into the government for them to have their legal people look over to make sure we're not committing too much. And it's due back out to us for final comment in July, and it's going to be published in September of this year. But I can't share that document with you, unfortunately. This is the one on Benedict Byron, and apologies for anyone who tuned in this morning, you would have seen some of this. But I think this goes into a little bit more detail. We were given the Cooperage building within this complex, which was built in 1720, and it was designed for 3,000 religious and 2,000 lay people. And so it's a town, really. When I went to visit it with Ralph from the Fraunhofer, there were about 7 monks, all over 80, mooching around the place and nothing else. The Benedictine order donated it to the government, German government, and the German government have been doing some great work in adaptive reuse of some of the buildings. And then they gave the Cooperage to the Fraunhofer as a live laboratory. And this is it before, and you can see the lime render was pretty shot. We measured it at about 40 to 42 millimeters thick. So we took it all off the building, and we decided to put back a number of test products. And the one on the right, I don't know, does that work? Can you see that? Yeah. This one we did in just an ordinary 40 to 42 mil lime render NHL, natural hydronic lime. And then this one we did with lime mixed with cork. And this one we did lime mixed with hemp. This one we did lime mixed with a product called aerogel, which was designed by NASA for protecting the ships coming back into space or from space. And we can tell you that the pure lime one actually increased the U value of this wall by 10%. The cork and the hemp are very close, 33 to 35% improvement. And then the aerogel was phenomenal, 75% improvement just at 40. Now it's still expensive, but the company that make it called Cadon, which is in America, but they've set up a small plant in Germany to manufacture this for the construction industry. And the analogy I give is when I bought my first mobile phone in 1987, it cost me £3,500 or something, and it was a briefcase, and you had to go to a mountain to get service. And now you can buy them. Now you can buy them for nothing. So anyway, this is an ongoing test site. Before we put the lime renders back on, we put loads of widgets in the wall to get moisture control, to get the relative humidity, to find the dew point, does it move. And then inside we did a number of what is that? So that's the one, but as you can't quite see, but we have tiny little wires hanging out of it. It all feeds back to our building management system, and we're monitoring every 15 minutes of every day through the winters. It's now been running for about 4 years, and we have phenomenal information on performance, but also from the internal. And again, we looked at different products instead of using plasterboard, which is a gypsum product which doesn't allow moisture movement. This is a calcium board, which does allow, it's made from lime, and it does allow moisture movement. And again, these are some of the control widgets that we have on there to tell us how it's performing and what the kind of humidity, but also the big black square one is the U value test, and we constantly check that. Then internally, we have all sorts of things hanging out of everything to kind of get relative humidity, air change, everything else. So it really is, and this is something that's now growing in Europe. We've got one in Ireland now in Limerick, a live laboratory. Because it's giving us hard data and actual data, this is what's going to drive and give us the ammunition to go and talk to people and say, well, if you do this, you're going to gain that. And we are finding within the property market in Europe that there's now a premium for, say, B-rated or A-rated kind of accommodation, whether it's office or whether it's dwellings. We're even playing with aerogel because it's such a fine product with paint coatings. If that works, a simple 5mm paint coating on the interior of a heritage building will improve the U value by up to 50, we think 50% or thereabouts. Now, the other thing that we find, and it's probably, well, it's slightly different here because you've got a lot of timber buildings, but in certainly solid masonry buildings, we invested in equipment and we're measuring the actual U value. Again, I don't know enough about here. We have a thing called BER, which is Building Energy Rating, or in the UK, sorry if there's any British here, but they like to call it different, and it's environmental certificate, EPs. Same system. It's a tick box system, but they designed it for post-1974 buildings, and therefore they give anything that's solid mason a default, and they give the default at 2.2 U value, which is just stupid. We've measured a lot of walls that come anything from 0.8 to 1.3. So if you're taking the default as a calculation, you're then putting on 300 mil insulation in order to meet the target, but you don't need it. Think of all that carbon and the damages done to the building, because it actually heats the building too much. So this is a phenomenal kind of exercise. Thermal comfort obviously is where we want to get to, but also the moisture movement within buildings, that's really important. And we found a lot of the early kind of retrofits in Europe, they've been using modern products such as polyurethane, polystyrene, and they are moisture closed. They don't have moisture movement, and therefore it entraps moisture and it causes decay to the historic masonry, but you don't see it because it's behind it. And it'll be in 50 years' time when they take something down and find that the building falls down as well. So that's really important. This is a short case study on a building that we've just literally completed. In fact, the contractors are due out next week. So I'll be cracking open a bottle of champagne that night. But it's called the Rubrics building. It's in Trinity College in Dublin, which is right in the city centre. It's that red brick building in front of you. The bottom left is actually the back of the building. But that's a brick building built in 1698, and it's been in continuous residential use ever since. And it houses mostly visiting professors, visiting lecturers, but also emeritus professors. But we're converting it now into more individual units where it will still house emeritus professors, visiting professors and lecturers, but a third of it is going to be student accommodation. And we expect a big bump on what student gets in there, because it's absolutely beautiful. But that red brick is 420 mil thick, and we did a physical U value test on that, and it came out at 0.83, which we didn't need to put insulation on, and that was a major saving. The roof was pretty shot, and it was there a long time, and you could literally put your finger through the slate. So we replaced the roof, but in doing that, then we were able to super insulate the roof. And then it was a suspended timber floor. We used geocell, which is a recycled glass insulation, which is phenomenal and easy to use and cheap, and it allows moisture and everything else. So we super insulated the floor, super insulated the roof space. That's just an aerial. So we were looking at improving energy efficiency. So we were the conservation consultants and the energy consultants, working with a large engineering company called ICOMOS.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty worldwide, but and we put in all modern stuff into it. That's the old roof, so don't get worried. So we provide the conservation and the fabric upgrade. We work closely with the other design team disciplines, which is really important. We were allowed by the college to do a lot of the analysis and research pre-planning, which is again really important because it not only tells us what we can do, it gives you a really good specification, which then gives you cost certainty when you go on site. So it's worth doing that analysis up front, and then obviously working to detail and then construction and handling. That was the back of it, which the photograph on the top right is a historic one, and we could tell from that it was a lime render that was harmed, which that's common over here, where it's thrown as opposed to kind of floated, and it gives this nice rough texture. Well, yours would certainly know it. But in the 50s, on the bottom left, they took off the lime render and they put a very hard cement pebble dash, which was just woeful. But we managed to convince the client that we need to take it off, and we did. And there's the rubble stone behind it, which we took off. And then on the bottom left, we started daubing out with lime and cork last render. And that's it, getting its second coat. And then in order to, because insulated render, it's made by Diathanite, which is an Italian company, but there is an Irish supplier of it. And what we did then was to get the original kind of finish, we used just an autoline NHL 3.5 as a dash coat to give it the rough finish. We did samples of this, we tested in the laboratory, we did a lot of accelerated weathering tests to make sure it was all going to perform. But that wall, when we measured it without the cement, was giving us a U value of about 1.4, and with the diathanite, it brought it down to about 0.98. And again, that meant we didn't have to insulate the interior and go to that trouble. So the sort of test that we like to do to give us the information, obviously, is indoor air quality is important. So we measure it before we start and after we finish. So when I get back, we have a 2-week period from the client to go in and do follow-on testing before it becomes occupied. And this is the U-value test kit that we put on the inside and the outside, and we monitor it remotely from the office. And we liked, it's a minimum of 7 days, but we like to leave it maybe 2 weeks if we can, because you get varying weather. The only thing we have to be careful about is that you need a differential temperature from inside to outside. So if the temperature is too close, we will kind of put heating into the room to get that differential. But it's important information to have before we can make the decision, because as I say, if we took the the BER standard, we'd be trying to fit 200, 300 mil insulation on. We didn't need it at all. We then do a lot of material testing. This is a simple Ryman tube test, it's called, which is a calibrated plastic tube which we stick on blue tack and fill it up with water to 0, and then we time the water then. So it's called an initial moisture uptake test, and that gives us the porosity of the brick, so that it's non-destructive. So it's very easy to do, and as you can see from some of the samples there, we do them on the brick itself, but we also do it over the mortar joint. In this case, this is a mortar, so it's important to know the porosity. We then, through our connections within Trinity, we actually formed as a campus company in Trinity, and therefore we had almost faculty status, and we used the laboratories there. And in geology, we took a core sample of the back wall because we wanted to know the continuity of it, and we did petrographic analysis on it. And then condensation risk analysis. Sorry, these are all too small to read, but it'll be in the presentation that you can access later. But again, it's important to know if condensation, because if you do have a condensation risk, then you're likely to get mold growth and you're likely to get damage. And then thermal bridge analysis, the weak points of the building where we would do all the physical testing. And we do it, properly. We don't like using calculative software tools. So just to finish, some of the other research documents that we've been pleasure to work on really is, I said we wrote the climate change adaptation plan. We've now been re-employed by the government, the Irish government, because they don't have the resources to actually implement the first 5 stages of what we recommended, and that's doing a lot of community consultation, stakeholder consultation. It's really a fascinating part of the whole thing. We wrote a document for Historic England called Understanding Carbon in the Built Environment. That was in 2020. That's actually published as well. And there we took a simple building, and I hope none of you watch Coronation Street, but it's that sort of a building. And we did a calculation on the carbon as it was. Obviously, it had an oil heater, so operational energy was going up, but the energy, there was no other, the embodied carbon was well spent. Then we did a light energy upgrade by just fixing windows, insulating roof and floor, and putting in a heat pump, which kind of was pretty good. It was about a 5-year payback. We did a deep energy retrofit where we did put insulations and things into walls, and that turned out to be about a 15-year payback. And then we demolished the building virtually, built a new building with all new carbon intensive products. It was going to take 63 years to pay back. So that's a good argument for adaptive use of our existing. And then, as I say, we're working a lot with European funding on how do we value the embodied carbon, how do we calculate. We're also working on possibly designing a special life cycle analysis tool for heritage and traditional buildings. There are many LCA tools out there, but they're all designed for new buildings, and you can't calculate what's going in an older building. I mentioned the guidelines for the energy. The other 2 more recent ones that we've just won funding for, Smart Lab, is taking 100 Georgian buildings in the city of Limerick on the west coast of Ireland, and we're putting in widgets to monitor the use of energy. And we have a saying that buildings don't use energy, people do. So by this widget, and it's remotely controlled, we can actually ring up Mary and say, you use too much energy this week, you need to turn down your heating, you need to turn down your thing. And we're going to run that for a year to see how it affects. And of course, with some of these houses are large, big, are Georgian buildings, and it might be now to be 80 one ton. The rest is empty. And of course, they don't heat the rest of the house, but that's drawing kind of cold. And so we want to get occupant information as well. So this is a really good study, I think. And then Fab Trabs, they're great with these names. Smart Lab is actually with the University of Limerick and Limerick City and County Council. And we jointly applied and got funding from an organization within Ireland called SEAI, which is Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. They were set up by the government to purely fund and encourage and incentivize energy retrofit. And then Fab Trans is with University College Dublin. And what we're doing there is we've identified 50 building typologies, and we're doing physical U-value calculations of those 50 typologies. So that'll become the start of a database that people can think, oh, that's like my house. That's my U-value. And at least it'll be the starting point. The Climate Heritage Network, as I mentioned, they've produced this global status report in 2022, which is again worth it's on the websites. It's easy to access. So thank you very much. And that ends the talk.
Thank you very much, Peter.